Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending upon where you are hailing from. Greetings to you all. I'm the Reverend Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute at Yale Divinity School. And the YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's gathering entitled Developing Your Praxis for Building Diverse Youth Communities with Dr. Brian Ragsdale. This is our fourth gathering for this year's YMI Lunch Lab series, and we have people joining us from across the country and even some siblings from around the region, different regions of the world today. So whether this is your first event with us or we are well known to you, we are so glad to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of busy lives and hectic schedules to be with us today. For our time today, Dr. Ragsdale will speak to us. We will have some time in breakout rooms, and we'll also have a brief Q&A session at the end of his presentation. We ask that you please remain muted throughout our time together, except during our sharing time, but we'll be monitoring the chat window. So if you have a question, either hang on to it or feel free to type it in there anytime. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them quickly and thank them for their work. The YMI falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS. So we have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director of the Center for Continuing Ed, and we have Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Thanks to both of you for all that you do, and more importantly, for who you are. If you are new to the Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a chance. That's yaleyouthministryinstitute.org, and Megan's going to hopefully put that in the chat for me. We have a whole array of resources on there. We have curricula for your youth. We have training modules for youth leaders, discussion forums. We have over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by youth ministry experts around the world. We have resources for anti-racism work, for youth who are working through mental health challenges. We have mission and outreach endeavors, links to other articles and materials. So all of that is available for free. Please do check out our website. There's a lot there. We also have a few events coming up that I would like to highlight quickly before I turn it over to Dr. Ragsdale. Our March gathering will be on Wednesday, March 6th, and it will feature Deneen Akers, who is the author of Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, and the Reverend Wendy Claire Berry, an Episcopal priest and curriculum writer for Holy Troublemakers and Journey to Adulthood. As many of us know, there's a huge lack of progressive faith curricula for our young people, and Miss Akers and Reverend Berry speak into that void and provide us with a lot of hope and insight. So please consider joining us for that discussion. It will be very robust, featuring how to get into good trouble, how to model such work for our young people. So that'll be Wednesday, March 6th at 12 p.m. on Zoom, and you can find that registration link in your chat. And for anyone local to New Haven and the surrounding region, please join us on Saturday, April 6th for our spring in-person event. That is called Breaking the Silence About Mental Health Challenges with Children and Teens. Our keynote speaker will be the Reverend Dr. Sarah Griffith Lund. Reverend Dr. Lund is the Minister for Disabilities and Mental Health Justice on the national staff of the United Church of Christ. She has written several books on this topic, including a recent survival guide for teens who struggle in this area. In addition to her addresses, we will have panelists of local mental health educators and practitioners who can provide local resources for follow-up. So that will be a day chock full of resource sharing and insights. So please join us if you can on April 6th. And just to provide a little tease, our final gathering for the year will be on Wednesday, May 1st, and will come from the Reverend Dr. Gia Starr Brown. Reverend Dr. Brown will lead important conversations about anti-racism work with young people, and that is going to be a major focus of our fall offerings as well. So please stay tuned for more information related to those gatherings. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Ragsdale. Dr. Brian Ragsdale is a visionary educator, a creative thinker, a visual artist, a community organizer, and an educational management professional. He is also a fiction writer, artist/painter, and self-taught musician and singer-songwriter, a real Renaissance man at heart. A licensed clinical psychologist with experience in entrepreneurial environments, distance learning, and online higher education administration, Dr. Ragsdale has published peer-reviewed works in the fields of psychology and child development, and served as a health disparities scholar for the National Minority Health and Health Institute at the National Institute of Health. Dr. Ragsdale, welcome. We are honored to have you here, and we are honored to be able to learn from you in this space.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen, but thank you so much. And it's so nice to see some of my new friends from the New Hampshire Psych Association and some of the folks I haven't met. And we'll have time for questions, and we'll have time to break out and talk to each other. So I just wanted to first, I'll go into my PowerPoints, but I always try to start off with some form of centering myself. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to say my own sort of meditation for what I hope to occur. And if this is part of your practice, go ahead and take a couple of minutes to center yourself with me in this space as we learn together. Just give me a couple of minutes here. Okay. Thank you. Let me share my screen. And you all should be able to see my screen now. Is that correct? Okay, good. So our talk is honoring the rainbow within, and I chose that title because I deeply believe that all of us have these multiple ways that we come to understand ourselves, and the rainbow, as we know, is a symbol for many of us, and particularly those who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community. How do we go about honoring that multiplicity of identities, along with now thinking about how we then take that knowledge and build our youth communities? So I wanted to just add a little bit more about how I came to be. Um, it's been a number of years becoming a licensed clinical psychologist in Illinois and New Hampshire. And some of my co-authored and authored work have been looking at child and adolescent development, identity development. In what ways does being a Black youth, for example, how does that shape their experience in their environment? So I'm very interested in how culture shapes identity development. I'm also very interested in the relationship between identity and trauma. In what ways does having experience with direct forms of trauma, violence, how do systems influence how we care for ourselves? How do youth sort of do this? So I've had counseling experiences with children in the foster care system. I've worked with families, urban and rural families in my work. I've developed courses around child development, adolescent development, trauma, and so forth. I'm also a examiner for disabilities and comprehensive examinations with veterans. So I spent a number of years looking at PTSD in veterans and so forth, and how do families support veterans. I also have experience teaching cognitive assessment for adult intelligence and also child intelligence testing. So, and I did that for about 5 or 6 years online. And my orientation in terms of my clinical work, I describe myself as a multiculturalist, and I'm very interested in some of the humanistic existential theories around how people come to be. And I've taught over 20 courses, both online and face-to-face. And I love teaching. I love sharing what I've learned over these years. And I have deep gratitude for the families. Most of the families I worked with were in Chicago. And the intersections and the complicated lives that poor African-American families have to deal with all these different systems. And I've learned a tremendous amount from them about their experience. Let me see what else. I think that covers me. I'm warm, friendly, and intense. And Jill could attest to that. I met Reverend Old last year when I presented at a graduate school class talking about my experience being an openly Black and gay clinical psychologist. And this is where I met Reverend Old. All right. So let's take a look at some of our learning goals and objectives. I'll let you read it. Can you all see that? Okay.
Dr. Ragsdale, we are in, you're not in like the screen share. We can see your screen. That's it. You got it.
Yeah, you can see my notes because I need to see.
Now we're good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to see my notes. I'm like, well, I can't see my notes, so how can I, you know? So anyway, so we did the introduction, and here's, let me move this chat space over. Here are our learning objectives. We're going to spend some time thinking about oppression, power, and privilege, the interconnectedness between these three. We'll talk about some of the challenges of identity and today's socio-political climate, because development is influenced by these systemic issues. And I'm going to share with you great work by the Aakoma Project. And just for a show of hands, have any of you familiar with the Aakoma Project? I'll look into the chat space. So Jill, if you can help me to see, this is your first interactive. Have any of you heard of the Aakoma Project? You
I've
just,
not.
yeah.
Seeing a lot of no's.
Okay. So we're going to share that, and I'm going to, also to try to brace yourself when I share what this is, what they found in this large 2,000 plus study, the state of mental health for youth of color. And then we'll conclude with thinking about how to take this information that I'm sharing, along with developing your active listening and emotional skills as you do this youth community building. Okay. Well, the first thing that I wanted to share with you is that to the left, when we say this is how we think that learning is, we think that learning is the point A to point B. Apologize. Let me get back. I'm going the wrong direction here. We think that we learn in the left side with, A, point A, but really our learning really is this curvilinear process. We go to the left and we go to the right. And so this really is how our learning occurs. It's going to occur in my conversations with you. You're going to experience the curvilinearness of how I think. But also, I'm sharing this with you because this is how youth also learn. They also learn through this curvilinear path of going one way, learning, and then going the other way. And so when we're thinking about the learning process of youth, we have to remember that it's not this sort of straight path, that it's really a curvilinear, because youth, they learn through experimentation, they learn through doing things, and so it's curvilinear. And also, I think in a very curvilinear way. Now, let me try to advance this. All right. So here's going to be our first, we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to ask that the group be broken up into whatever I think there are about 30 of us, so we can break the group up into 10 each. And this is what I want you to do in this first interactive group assignment, is I would like you to share your first name, your state. So share your first name, the state you come from, and then share what's your favorite color in the group. And then I want you to take some time to think about 2 or 3 talents that you had when you were the ages of between 10 or 13 or 10 or 14. I want you to sort of think about what were those experiences you had that were very positive for you. So I'll share 2 with you, and then we can break into groups. One for me, when I was 14, my first paid job, I was in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I got paid to be William in the Me Nobody Knows. I was a singer and an actor in an off Broadway play. So that was the first that was the first experience that I had of really being very, very positive. So that's the kind of thing I like you to do in your group. And we'll come back and we'll have 2 or 3 of you come off mic and share with the group. And then you'll see where I'm going with this. Okay. I think you all can see where I'm going with this exercise, which is, you know, thinking about your own experiences between that time frame also can serve as a way of using this information, this emotional information, to sharing this, the feeling, the positive strength-based feeling of this when you are developing your youth communities, when you are working with youth. And one of the things that we talked about in our group, which I think is also fascinating, is how other people in the community started to relate to the person around these strengths. So there was that direct reward and feeling positive and good about your talents that you had. But also there's this community piece, these other rewards, these other positive feelings that then help you and the youth to feel like they belong in the communities. So this is very important for youth to feel like they have these positive strengths, and that then those positive strengths help to support this feeling of belonging and connection. So those are 2 of the critical ways that youth start to feel, start to master the sense of feeling connected, this feeling of feeling like they belong and connected. And this certainly does apply to adults, but for this conversation, we're thinking about how you're building your practice and so forth. So here on the next slide, I'm going to share my screen. If I'm not already, let me share my screen. And I want to show you the slide from current slide. I want to show you something that you already know, but I want you to know that I'm approaching you as an audience that you already have this other sets of knowledge and skills. But when we're looking at our youth program, we have to remember there are these developmental milestones. And there are learnings that occur in those particular milestones. So grade school, teen, young adults, and so forth. And this figure I'm sharing is with the American Academy of Pediatrics. And just by taking a look at one of those milestones, I did a deeper dive into grade school. And when you're doing your program development, take deeper dives into the information within those milestones as you are constructing your programs and thinking about your communities. So here, for example, you have parenting a gender diverse child, some of the hard questions. You have gender identity development. So within those developmental milestones, you want to go down deep, take a deeper dive to see to what degree are you covering those topics that are related to those specific developmental milestones in those age groups. Are you all with me here? Yeah. So you're using your existing resources. You're using your knowledge about youth and adolescents in your community, your local community, and you're beginning to think in broader ways about the systems that you're creating to making sure you're addressing some of these issues. So this next here, I wanted to talk to you about how, looking at the left side of the PowerPoint, at each stage of a child's and adolescent's development, the need for belonging actually grows over time. So as they're going through the different stages, the need for belonging increases. And as they're doing this, there's a socialization process that's happening to them around their children, around their peers, their family, and their schools. Our youth today are challenged in different ways because of social media. And the social media is driven by this connection to our historical systems. And here, what I'm trying to underscore is to really get you to think more about some of the systems that are representative on social media. The way that, for example, gender is discussed, the way that we think about our perceptions of ethnicity and race, the way that we think about neurodivergent thinking and learners and so forth. This is also occurring for our children through social media. So through social media, there are these historical systems that then in some ways are impacting the developmental learning process for our children. And therefore, on the right-hand side, our programs that we look at, they need to be flexible and strength-based. They should be activity-based and not lectures. So the children are actually engaged and they're doing activities. And the third part of this is that the children and adolescents that you're working with have to be incorporated in this programmatic plan that you're doing, which I know this sometimes it may take longer to do that, but that's becomes a very important part. Their voice, their experience is incorporated into your planning. So I'm unable to see if there's any questions that are emerging, Jill, but feel free to stop me if they are. I don't necessarily have to have people wait until the end, but if they have pertinent questions, feel free to stop me. Let's go to our next slide. Let me see. All right. So we just talked about systems and historical systems, and I'm drawing a direct connection between our communities, the social media, with systems. And here are some definitions that I'm thinking about as in our talk. And I'll let you all take some time to just go ahead and read this, and I'll underscore for you why I think this is important. So I tend to think about these pressure, oppression, power, and privilege as an interconnected systems that reinforce and support and connect with each other. And I like this definition of oppression that refers to this combination of prejudice and institutional power that then creates this system, right? And privilege is how certain people in certain groups have this advantage and immunity sort of granted to them around their status, around their perceived status, the privilege they get. And praxis is this concept of how do we then put those, how do we apply these ideas that we hold into our way of thinking of programs, into our science or skill. Praxis is the practical application of how we theorize. So when I am looking at doing a youth program, I'm thinking about what are the things that the youth can experience as forms of oppression, where there is some prejudice on my part that then reinforces this institutional systemic issue of oppression. I am in my creation of this thinking on that level systemically. I'm also thinking about privilege, in which way, whether a child may be privileged more than another child. So I'm thinking deeply about these systemic influences. And it challenges my brain, of course, because typically we don't think about the influences of systems. We tend to think that the systems that we are a part of are somehow morally correct and absent of these other issues. But my perspective is that these are functioning operational systems that are going on, and we have to have some consciousness around these ideas that oppression and power and prejudice are functioning and operating. And let me try to illustrate this point a little clearer in the next slide here. So this is my artistic endeavor. At the top, you see I have families, schools, hospital, churches. Those are the environments in which children and adolescents exist. Underneath that, I have oppression, power, and privilege that I sort of talked about. You could then merge those together if you had to. And then I'm trying to illustrate to you the bidirectional relationship between the family and example and power, for example, that exists in family. Do you see the illustration that I'm trying to? I see some nods here. I can't see all the nods. I see Dr. Ree. I see Dr. Lynn. I see nods. So you see what you see. I'm trying to underscore. Not only do peers and families play a role in this identity development of children and adolescents, I'm pointing out how the systems influence this developmental process across these developmental milestones. And if we don't think about those oppression and power and privilege, then how are we building these communities with our youth when, in fact, they're being influenced by those systems? And youth will articulate this too. They'll say, you know, in my school, there's ABC happening. They'll say, when I went to the hospital, ABC happened. They'll talk about their experience with these systems. And I think it's important for us to move our thinking to this level of systems influence. And this is what I'm trying to illustrate in this hectic looking graph, that there are these systemic influences. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start back. Thank you for staying with me here. As we see here, this is a large study, and Dr. Breland Noble, who I've had the honor and privilege of knowing for, I guess, 25 years or so. She's led this Aakoma project looking specifically at the mental health of youth of color. And what I like what her group has done is the zooming in and looking at youth of color. And this is a very large sample size of 2,095 folks. And you can see that even there's this great representation of Black, Latino, Asian American, Native American. You can see the representation of ethnicity and race at the top. And you can see that it's relatively well divided between 13 and 17 and 18 and 25. So you see this really nice balance of thinking about where these youth are now when they're 13 and 17 and so forth. So let me share, and I want to also that the slides that I'm going to share with you, the findings are dramatic and they're sad. And so I'm trying to balance some of that perspective before you see the slides. This is 2,000 or so youth of color, and queer youth as well. So let me try to see if I can say, I'm really trying here, Jill, and it's just, all right. So anxiety, you can see that roughly 50% of all the youth have experienced a mild form or severe anxiety. And that when you take a look down into the actual groups themselves, Black youth, for example, they're saying they struggle with decision-making and worrying about bad things that happen. Anecdotally, I think that this also, I know as an African-American, I also have this worry about bad things happening as well as an adult. Latino youth are just struggling with decision-making. Asian American and Native American, they're avoiding situations that they have to worry about. So you can see that their mild and severe anxiety levels are high, but here you can see that there's the different groups, how they worry and are anxious differently. And now when we take a look at anxiety with gender identity, looking at moderate to severe anxiety, you can see that girls and young women around the 50% range, You see here like Native American young men are like 70%, 69.7. You can see now when you look at anxiety along with gendered identity and ethnicity, you can see this interactive systemic thing that I was trying to point out earlier. And when I illustrated this for you. And now when you take a look at non-binary, 80% of Black non-binary transgender youth report high levels of moderate to severe anxiety. So when you're doing your youth program, your youth communities, I would like you to overlay this onto your thinking about your programs and how you're building communities. These are extremely high numbers here of moderate to severe anxiety. And when we think about the social media, what's happening in our the historical political, we know that the transgender youth are going through a tremendous amount of anxiety-provoking environmental context things across, like example, the family and the hospital and the church, those environments that I was showing you earlier. So we're still building with strengths, but we're also thinking about this other reality from this survey. Let me take a look at one more slide. Of course, when I try to advance it, it's going to go backwards. So let's just see. Okay, now we're looking at moderate to severe depression. Again, we see that African-American youth, 52% out of 2,000 or so. And then again, you see the Native American youth. So you can see across the board, and we're not talking mild, we're talking moderate to severe depression. So this data was like a wake-up call when I started to reading it, because I didn't know that the numbers were this high. But this is the group of youth that we're thinking about as we think about in the United States, for example, the multicultural population growth that we're thinking of. And remember, this is between the ages of 13 and up to 25. Here, I wanted to underscore two other things that I think are quite important. One is, the first is looking at the county level poverty rates for school-aged children. And that median rate was at 17%, looking at across all different counties in the United States. So we're talking about a significant group of children who are at the poverty level. So on top of looking at these ethnicity, anxiety, we then have to think about the effects of poverty. So many of the communities that we're working in are poor communities. And then the other, I went to the White House and I looked at this other study that looks at the impact of our learning for our youth. And it shows that they are 5 months behind in math and four months behind in reading. So in addition to the mental health struggles that we talked about and the impact of systemic issues related to poverty, we also have this other effect of COVID. And so when you are building building your youth communities and your programmatic, I'm trying to help you to think about it from a systemic perspective. And so if the youth are not, if they're behind in their math or reading, that then has to be incorporated in how you're presenting materials to your different developmental milestones. Am I making sense? Yeah. And it kind of stretches us. But the fact that we are doing this work in the communities that we are, I think that we can make a dent. And let me show you another way that I try to think about how to do this. Okay, so these are programmatic development ideas. Okay, So here I think about holding two things at once. On the left, I'm talking about strength-based approaches, and I'm talking about the areas that we tend to think of as weaknesses or areas to work on. So let me focus on the strength-based because you've already intuited that I've said, and I've really been upfront that much of what we do has to focus on youth strengths, whatever that is. And it's best to start with the strengths because it fosters a sense of a mastery for the child or the community that you're working in. If the group of children love singing, then that's what your program needs to look like. Because if you sing, for example, you have to know some form of math because of beats and the timing of the beats. So the children can develop a lot of different skills from where they're at. It's also very positive. It also helps you as a program community builder to be working with people who you're bringing some of that emotional feelings that we talked about earlier, and it builds their capacity. So we know in psychology, for example, working with people with their strengths, that then gives them this dynamic, energetic way to begin working on areas that need to be improved. And we all know this within our own lives, right? The strength, when someone approaches us from a strength-based approach, we think like, oh, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. Now, if we are solely focused on the weakness, on the right-hand side, when we focus on weakness with children and adults, but for now we're talking about children and adolescents, it tends to exhaust the child because the child and adolescent starts to feel like, I'm never going to be able to master this. And that exhaustion then connects up to frustration. And you've all seen this in your groups, that children start to feel frustrated. And the other thing that the last piece of this is that it is very difficult for children and adolescents to show mastery across all these areas. And that not being able to be good at all these different things tends to erode the child's sense of ability to go forward. So I'm going to try to slow this down and share it a different way. Part of the developmental process for a child is mastery at these developmental milestones, and they are fast and furious. They come very quickly for children. As soon as they learn one grade, one thing, they have to learn something else. They have to learn. So it's a very fast-paced learning process for them. And they soon discover as they age that there are certain things that they're just not as good at. And so if our programs are focusing on those areas, it then has the potential to reinforce inside of themselves psychologically that they're not good at doing things. So this is why it's so important to work on the strength base. Now, parents and teachers, as you know, in our testing environment, tends to look at the weaknesses and tends to say, well, this child needs to be at this level, they should be at this place. So what I'm saying is not to necessarily ignore the weaknesses, but I'm saying start with the strengths and you hold the weaknesses in balance. And here, once again, I'm just underscoring what you already know, but you have to remember your own youth experiences as you build. It's important to connect your own experiences. You approach your youth from a positive and strength-based. So what is positive about our program? Is our program, for example, in the time that the youth are available? How do we acknowledge the strengths of the youth? All those are types of things that you should carry with you thinking about your programs. And then you want to build the time to check in with the youth, whether that's at each group you meet with them or at the 1 month mark of thinking about, well, how is our programs making an impact in our community? We want to build in that time to check in with our youth. So positive, on the right-hand side, positive connection and belonging are what I want you to remember to take away from my conversation today. Positive connection and belonging. And you achieve this by breaking the youth up into smaller groups and also build in reflection time for yourself and breaks as well. And I was going to take another break here, but I think I want to try to open it up. Yeah, I want to open it up for questions that you may have. I'm going to skip over this. Um, and then we'll end with this active listening and emotional intelligence, which is, you'll see this in the PDFs that we can send to you. But I wanted to stop here to see if there were any questions that I could answer.
I'm not seeing any in the chat. I have some good Q&A stuff lined up for you, Brian, but I think for the moment, I think we're
The good.
okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Oh, so you mean so Jill says Jill's like Dr. Reverend O's like, I have something for you. I got some questions. I'm like, okay. I think I'm teasing you. So all right. So now these are some two additional things that you can use in this process of how to build, actually how to do this thing. One is at this active listening, right? Engaging with mindfulness, which is mindfulness, we know, has a way of structuring our own well-being. When we are engaged with having to think about things, it helps us to center ourselves and it helps us to get more purpose and meaning. And so doing programs and listening to children and engaging with them in a mindful way is very helpful for them and for you. Giving your full attention to the child is important. Making eye contact and stopping this other sort of things that you're doing, getting down the child's level, and then reflecting and repeating back what is said so that the child feels like you're understanding them. Along with this active listening way that we're thinking, I don't really like the word intelligence, emotional intelligence. I like the word awareness to be a better way of thinking about this. The ways in which children can identify and know what their feelings are. So in your programmatic space, having those charts, those figures that children can point out how they're feeling is also very important to have in the physical space. So a place where children can say, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad. So when I'm working with children, I ask them by using this chart to pick out one or two or three feelings, because children often think, well, I'm happy. And often children are happy, sad, angry. And recognizing that they have these multiplicity of feelings at once is an important acknowledgement that you can do. Labeling emotions, helping children, to have a language of sadness, frustration, anger. And then this process of emotional awareness is about also helping children to regulate those emotions, these intense. And when you think about children from this developmental milestone perspective, you can see how challenging this is for children and youth. And there are tremendous amounts of ways that they have to learn all of this stuff in brief periods of time. So they're going through explosive growth periods. Like what they learned about their friends in the school year changes from the time they start to the end of the school year. And you all know this. But I think having that awareness and helping the child through some of this with helping them label their emotions in the programs is helpful. I think I see one question coming in. Let me see.
Yeah, we've got a few here. Do you want to shift over to questions or you want to wrap up and then we'll address some things?
Well, you see, I did ended the presentation with my consultation services deal. I put a
Awesome.
plug in there for myself, and then I just did the overview, which I think is, I
Yeah.
think they'll see it in the PDF. So what I like to
Okay.
do, if I can, I like to to stop sharing my screen and come back to you and then be in this interactive way. So I'm going to stop my share and let the questions begin.
Awesome. Thank you. Folks, feel free to throw some questions into the chat as we go. We'll do our best to get to all of these. I'll add my traditional caveat that if we do not get to all of the questions, I will have some time separately with Dr. Ragsdale for an interview. So if we don't get to them before the end of our time, we will get to them and we'll get those answers to you. But just for getting us started here, Kelly is asking about suggestions for getting parents to engage in good active listening. What are some thoughts you have, and perhaps some tips and tricks for how to really pay attention and engage in that?
Well, I think with parents and families, I think visiting visiting them in their home, if that's possible, or Zoom, and recognizing and having compassion how challenging it is for parents. So approaching parents from this place of deep compassion. And what that looks like, I think, is the parents have a really good understanding of their child. They have a very good, and they may have been trying to communicate their understanding of what their child needs in these systems. And the systems can tend to come back and say, well, we think it's X. And the parents, so you've lost a parent at this point because you haven't really connected with the parent's perspective of the child and what the child needs. And the parent will engage with you more when the parent feels that they are being supported in their understanding of what the child needs. Did I answer that question, Jill? Dr. Old, did I answer?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, that having compassion for the parents who are in the midst of all of that is hugely important. I just echoing sort of what you said, but also, you know, helping. I think that also models something for the parents themselves, right? To be
Yeah.
able to hopefully just lower the anxiety in the room a little bit if possible, and let them really sit with their child and what they're hearing. I also
Yeah.
heard you sort of talk a lot about labeling emotions earlier and helping young people do that, which is a really important skill, and I'm not sure parents in the heat of the moment model that super well. So, you know, I kind of wonder if that's an opportunity, but yeah.
And I think the other challenge for parents, and you hear this often with parents, is that they are often, they may have two or three children who are at different developmental milestones. So they're like, well, this child, this worked well when they're this, but this child, so they're trying to do this multiple calibration to these developmental milestones as we talked about. And so they have a very short time span to really address and meet the needs, because the developmental milestones, as I'm trying to underscore, are happening very quickly, you know, and they're happening rapidly, quickly. And the parent is looking for these sort of answers. And I think by helping the parent understand the complexity of this, then they kind of say, oh, yeah, you're right, yeah. So then the question becomes, what can you do in the next 2 weeks or next 30 days? Not like, you know, I need to get my child to high school, because, your child is at this point. So that's the other part. Is there another question?
Yes, thank you. That's really helpful. Yeah, shifting gears, Anita is asking, what would be a good way to start working with students who are immigrants? They're developing a program in their setting and not sure where to begin with that. Any insights there?
Is that Dr. Rubik? Hi, Dr. Rubik. Hi. Uh, I do think that there has to be some historical understanding of the immigrant group. We know that immigrants who've come to our country have had sociopolitical entry into our country. Some have been quite traumatized in that immigration process. So there has to be some understanding of this family's immigration history within this generation, but also the prior generation. So now you're talking about this intergenerational trauma that immigrant families often are carrying with them. I think helping immigrant families to navigate these complex systems is quite important. because the systems are, as you know, are just quite complex. And when immigrant families are trying to access these systems, they don't often know who they can talk to about what. And I think saying to the immigrant family, I'm with you. I mean, I get it, but I'm with you. And when people show up for each other in consistent ways and say, hey, I don't know that, but I know somebody else who might know, that then builds the foundational support for all of our work with families in need. But it's particularly helpful for the immigrant family who's carrying with them this bimodal cultural approach that they're trying to do, which is another complexity. And communities, as we know, when there are large influxes of immigrants, for example, those communities sometimes resist the sort of accommodation and acculturation process of those immigrants. So I hope that helped you to sustain some of your work with them. But it's an art, and having some historical understanding is important, and not just for yourself, but for how they understand it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Judith asks, how do you go about introducing a new skill or activity, especially if you do not know if it is a child's strength? Any advice for introducing new material?
Well, I think it's very important to know the key people in a child's life, whether that's the teacher's aide or the principal or somehow you have to have a community where you have these touch points of, hey, I know that you've been working with this family, a child. Can you tell me their strengths? The folks around that family will say, oh, such and such loves baseball. They just love, baseball. Oh, okay, baseball. Okay, great. So we need to do some baseball stuff. So now you think, okay, well, the skill I want is reading. Well, okay, baseball cards. I'm building off of the strength. And I'm building off of the actual network and community around this child and this family, not just me as Brian Ragsdale, the individual. I'm not going in with a savior complex. Believe me, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But if I go in and say, well, let's look at this family. What are the resources internally with the family? You're like, okay, is there a grandmother, grandfather, older person there that's really helping? Let's look at the child. I mean, so then you start to think, well, what are the skills then that this program is trying to teach? And how can I complement this skill with what's happening in the community? And that's the challenge, right? Because we think, but do I have the time to go to the school? Well, yeah, you have the time. Yeah. And then when you tell children, I went to your school. When you go to school, I know you're nodding because you go to school and the child, I thought that's my such a day. And so you're building this network of community that the child then starts to feel like they belong. You see, they start to feel like they belong because they see that there's a community, like in the Black community, for example, like my mother knew what was going on because somebody at the school would say, I called you. You see, that was there. We don't have to let go of what we know. We just have to kind of apply it in our practice of what we know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this question sort of dovetails a little bit. This, let's see, sorry. This comes from Alyssa. Would you be able to speak about how to champion a child's strengths that may not be championed at home for them? And I would, sort of add my own piece to that, which is, how to help them feel a sense of belonging, because you see those strengths that may not be seen elsewhere.
This is a tough one. This is getting to that tough. Let me see if I understand the question. So there's a perception, like to say if a child is likes to sing, and the child at home, the people in the family are like, you know what? We tired of hearing you singing. We try to get work done. We want to hear you singing. So is that the kind? So we're talking about that kind of that it's not being reinforced in the home, right?
And Alyssa, feel free to jump in here if you could want to clarify something.
Yeah, I don't think this is my first thought about this. Our systems are not necessarily competing systems. And parents will tell you, I've known my child and saying, that's not what I'm trying to work on now. I mean, that's how parents have responded to me. Like, look, I know my child sings well, but right now they need to focus on such and such. So then there's a balance between my programmatic goals around supporting the strength-based singing and also supporting the parents. So it's not a, it could be both and not an either or. Because if I come in and I say, well, I want you to solely focus on this singing because it can get you to play, that's not going to work with that family. It's just not going to work. So what we think of as strengths, uh, the family may think of those strengths in a very different way, but that can change over time too, you know. But the system of a school system or a community doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't usurp the authority of the family, which was the hardest thing for me to understand and to learn. That it had to complement in some ways what the family was trying to achieve and do, and that couldn't happen unless I understood the family's challenges. Yeah.
And that has to be particularly tough. I'm extrapolating, so tell me if I'm getting this right, but that has to be especially difficult if the family is uh, unhealthy, dysfunctional. If we're talking now about justice issues, we have a major crisis in our country around LGBTQ plus youth who do not find their family of origin to be a safe space for them, right? So, yeah, it just strikes me that's very complex. You're helping us sort of in all of these answers. I'm hearing you helping us kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the whole system.
Yeah.
And to look at that system, the system of families of origin is an incredibly complex thing to do.
And that's, that's not to say that there's not this epistemic belief of violence, right, in children's lives, because we know that this is can be a very violent situation for the child. So having this awareness of the epistemic violence of beliefs around trans and homophobia and heterocentricity and all these ways in which these systems have been in place to marginalize the experience, and that the children are undergoing bullying and violence and all these other things. Um, and the safe space, this the safe space question. And I think when you're in community with other folks, the safe space issue is not just in my mind calling the police. It's just not, it's just that could be one of the things that may happen or occur. But I think the building the support for what the child and the family need is an important aspect of this. And I think this other thing that I was trying to underscore is that the systems that we function in often identify us in our roles and functions as being the savior. And we go into it thinking, well, we're here to help. And that mentality or that way of thinking or that attitude often causes more harm in families because they don't know who you are. That's one of the first things, families would say, I don't know who you are. Yeah, you got some degree from such and such, but I don't know who you are. That kind of thing. But this is complex, and I think if we try to reduce things out of the complexity, I think we then act in a certain ways that also could potentially cause harm. And this is why I think consulting with each other and talking about what to do is important.
Sure. That's helpful. That's really helpful. And in some ways, this is actually the flip side. Well, in some ways, not all. But Sophia is asking. She says, "I work at an almost all-white church. I'm wondering about engaging kids and youth around oppression and violence. Mostly, these folks are very privileged to be sheltered from those things. How to do this in a nurturally, developmentally appropriate way? Any resources are welcome."
Well, one of the common comments I get in my anti-racist work, and I'm going to begin talking about my interest in looking at and exploring whiteness. One of the first things that someone says to me is, "I can never understand your experience." And that sort of way of like saying that to me just feels like, well, you can imagine, I mean, Disney imagines a whole nother world. So you can imagine a whole nother world. So you can understand my experience. I think that some of the ways that we think about people are uh, uh, reductionistic and uh, uh, monoliths. And if we think about white people, they are diverse and different in their whiteness. For example, there's this a lot of issues around class between white people, for example. We also know, for example, and let me know, Jill, if I've gone too far over the field, because this is a deep conversation here. We've also know that whites who are like have red hair, they get treated differently. So there's a complexity of thinking of when we do this anti-racism work around whiteness and privilege. Uh, Many people feel that the privileges that they have are merited, that they have come because their groups of people have worked hard for it. And I think the question of uh, that meaning of privilege and how that network needs to respond is that conversation that helps people to move along this anti-racist uh, point of view. Dr. Wimmick and I are just starting to get to know each other, for example. And so we start to have these conversations about race and racism and whiteness and so forth. So I don't think it's a way of approaching the white group in a sort of monolithic way. But I think if we're talking about anti-racism work, then that's a different way of approaching them.
That makes a ton of sense. And this is a sort of a branch off of that question as well. Rashid asks, how can we support students of color from urban communities who deal with trauma experiences?
Yeah, I think the question there is how do we support adults who are traumatized? And I can share this example. Years ago, I wrote a grant to NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, and I exclusively wanted to look at Black families. And the ways in which our systems operate, they're like, well, you can't look at Black, you got to look at the child and adolescent. So, but I'm interested in the family, but the granting organization is interested in the child and adolescent, which I perceive this disconnection as a form of anti-Black racism, because the Black family has never really been able to be looked at and treated and accorded the respect because of enslavement. Because part of enslavement was to separate this family. And the systems then function and operate in that same way and say, okay, well, if you're a youth of color who's traumatized, how do we meet your needs? What ends up happening in those situations, in my experience, the youth then start bringing home this mindfulness, this other knowledge that the traumatized adult parent is like, I don't know what you're talking about here. You see, in this way that we have tried to support the youth who's traumatized, we have then created a separation point between the family as a unit who's traumatized. So this was a hard lesson for me to learn, because I was going in and talking to Black families in Chicago about their experience with intercommunal violence and gun violence. And I was trying to think about what the family was exposed to. And the parents would talk about what it was like for them, for example, playing spades with each other, but hearing the gunshot, and then having to hit the floor. What I soon learned was that it was a whole community experiencing trauma. Teachers were experiencing trauma, right? Secondary trauma in schools. If you talk to any teacher today, they probably have some form of vicarious traumatization. So do working with, so many of us are in a trauma community, we're in trauma communities. And so while we can focus on the youth, we also then have to create this other way of supporting our adults who are also traumatized in those communities. So that's a great question, by the way. Rashid, thank you. Yeah, and children learn how to deal with trauma when they see how we learn and deal with trauma, because it's unrelenting. The trauma that we experience is unrelenting. As soon as we deal with one trauma, the next day, 2 or 3 days, another trauma happens. And you all know what I'm saying. But imagine now that you're a child in that environment. So, great question.
Yeah, thank you. I think in our interview, we're going to be chatting a little more about that because there's so much to unpack there. So thank you. We have 3 minutes left, so I'm mindful of time, but there's one additional question in the chat from Marie, who says, thinking about different developmental stages, how would you determine when to sit with young people in their uncertainty and questioning versus providing them with answers, especially when they ask for them?
Yeah. I think sitting with uncertainty is an important aspect of community building. When I'm teaching my students and therapists, one of the pressures is unknowing. Like, yeah, I got to know. I just got to, what is this? I got to know it. But I think holding space for that uncertainty is such an important way that everyone in that context can be learning together. And I think it's important to share with children and families when you're uncertain, to actually verbalize that uncertainty. Because I think when you don't know something, it helps to bring people together to know. And that's the hardest part of having a doctorate degree and a master's in student loans. Because you're like, wait a minute, I think I know, but really that uncertainty is helpful. And there was a second part of that question. Can you read the second part of that question again, Jill?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. How to help. So basically, how to determine whether to give young people answers, especially if they are asking for them, instead of just sitting with their
Yeah.
uncertainty and questioning.
Yeah, and that is the hardest thing, because there are things that family members feel they want to be able to teach and answer in the family. And so this is why when you're creating programs, it's important to involve the child and the family in what is transpiring. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Seeing lots of appreciation and appreciative texts and thank yous to you for your time. Folks, thank you so much. And just a reminder that we have some upcoming events, so please do check out our website and our newsletters for that. But Dr. Ragsdale, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing with us. And everyone, thank you for attending and giving us of your time and space and minds and hearts. We're grateful.
It was great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.